bitten off more than I could chew. So I'm going to skip the reading. Don't worry, the sermon's still really long. All right. It is hard to believe that the word truthiness has been around for 20 years. The term alternative facts has been around for almost 9, and fake news has been around for 8. Our former 7 principles, which were a covenant among UU congregations about how to be in the world, tasked us with the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, among other things. Although the principles were replaced in the UUA bylaws during our 2024 General Assembly by the shared values we're getting to know, the U.S. is full of news and so-called news that makes engaging the question of how to do that searching in the world as it now is, we'll call it difficult. I mean, how do we search freely and responsibly for truth and meaning in a world where a significant part of the population believes alternative facts, for example? I've noted in the past that our U.S. American culture and society has been changing in the last 2 or 3 generations, and those changes have all brought us to this moment. The slide toward authoritarianism and fascism that we're experiencing now is bound up with the slide toward ignoring and even disputing objective facts, suggesting that information isn't that important, that what we say is the truth is fact just because we've said it. Earlier this year, TryUU's book club read How to Stand Up to a Dictator, The Fight for Our Future by Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa, published in 2022. And then I also read Masha Gessen's Surviving Autocracy, published in 2021. Both women are journalists. Ressa has reported in the US and the Philippines, and Gessen, now in the US, has reported in the Soviet Union and Russia, Hungary, Israel, and the US. Both know intimately about the potential for the horrors of being a journalist in these countries and what it takes to work against authoritarian regimes and dictatorships. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without all 3, we have no shared reality. And democracy as we know it, and all meaningful human endeavors are dead, writes Maria Ressa in her book. She continues, I began calling it democracy's death by 1,000 cuts. Gessen takes it further. She writes, another quality of totalitarian leaders and their followers alike is the belief that the ends justify the means. This makes it easier to accept the lie as a tactical move, even to support it, and to accept the next lie, and the one after that, and the one after that. That is, lies get told to change society to be molded into a particular image. Ultimately, Gessen writes, healing can come when society chooses between the path of reckoning and the path of forgetting. The path of reckoning is the only way to make the future different. But this raises questions about how that's possible when we aren't even in agreement about the facts or what's true. Right now, we are stuck in a terrible place where truth isn't necessarily based on facts or reality, and where truth is equated with being right or wrong. Truth has been politicized, just like everything else in our lives. And as Gessen writes, being right has become a question of power, not evidence. There is only a binary here, with no opportunity for reconciliation without abandoning what many might feel as their selves. So what is a UU to do? I was listening to a podcast recently, The Convocation Unscripted, highly recommend. And one of the speakers briefly named that much of what we're consuming as news these days falls more into the propaganda category as opposed to journalism. We experience this in the way that people equate any person's authority as the same as that of a trained professional. We've been trained to believe that having an opinion is the same as being a journalist or whatever other professional. Some of this is because of social media, influencers and writers of all kinds who have opinions are treated like their work is an article instead of an editorial or opinion piece. Being published on your own Facebook page isn't the same thing as being published in the New York Times. Any person or bot can set up a Facebook page. Journalists have a professional code of ethics, research skills, journalism degrees, field experience, and so on, which is not the same as some person or bot or AI saying things, something that we're seeing more and more of on social media these days. Ressa writes, lies repeated over and over become facts in this online ecosystem. As a journalist, I know that we are only as good as our last story. We report the facts because that creates our shared reality. And we are in a time where our words are literally being weaponized, that people are attacking and even killing others because of what they've said. This isn't new, but the response to this is different than we've experienced in the past. Even in the not so distant recent past, there would be leaders calling for us to come together, for example, and stop the violence. We haven't been hearing anything like that lately. Instead, we're hearing the opposite. There are a variety of reasons for this. One is because many of us have lost the ability to hold complexity, the idea that two or more things may be true at once. As author Oliver Kornetsky writes in his Substack piece, The Death of Nuance in America, one of the deepest problems in our discourse is that Americans have lost the ability to think in nuance. We live in a culture that thrives on binaries, good or evil, right or wrong, patriot or traitor. Complexity isn't just ignored, it's treated with suspicion, as if acknowledging it were betrayal. The very idea that multiple truths can exist at the same time short circuits the conversation before it even begins. It hasn't always been this way, he says, but somewhere along the way we lost that muscle. We traded it for digital sound bites and tribal loyalty, for media bubbles and political grandstanding. We abandoned the willingness to look contradiction in the face and call it by name. And now, when someone dares to do so, the reflex is outrage. The assumption is betrayal, and the conversation collapses before it even begins. A few weeks ago, in the September 21st service, I mentioned that I'd been reading a book called Belonging Without Othering. And I want to name it again because the two authors spend a lot of time breaking down the many ways that we other each other, including how it happens and why this matters. One of the ways that they identify is this inability to hold complexity. We become so focused on one aspect of our identity that it becomes the foundation of our othering, because within that identity, a sense of belonging emerges, along with our desire to protect it. This creates or reinforces the us versus them mentality that we live in today. So, for example, in this moment, Democrats and Republicans are basically mortal enemies. And because of the political climate, social media, and other factors, we have overwhelmingly bought into this battle, participating on our designated side, as if those are the only two possible identities in the world that could ever matter. Not being parents or grandparents or siblings or Swifties or Browns fans or Outlander fans or conservationists or avid readers or Floridians or knitters or gardeners or whatever else. Just Democrats and Republicans. Kornitsky writes, the reason for this runs deeper than any individual outrage. It's systemic. American media thrives on the binary because binaries sell. Outrage keeps eyes glued to screens, tribal loyalty keeps audiences loyal to networks, and simplicity is profitable. Our education system, too, conditions us toward the same shallow dichotomies. History textbooks flatten centuries into morality plays. George Washington the hero, Stalin the villain, America the liberator, never the colonizer. We are not taught to sit with contradiction. We are taught to memorize sides. Even religion, for so many, reinforces the same framework: saved or damned, believer or heathen, good or evil. Add in partisan politics, which has devolved into blood sport, and you have a society systematically trained out of nuance. We see a lot of propaganda about MAGA and Christian nationalism and so on, and it's important to speak against these ideologies. It's also important to remember that these are small percentages of the population. Significant-ish minorities, but minorities nonetheless. And we forget that average people, like at least some of our families, and people maybe went to high school or college or worked with at some point, are mostly just trying to figure out how to make it in this world. We are all more than one thing, one identity. Going back to the idea of choosing between the path of reckoning and the path of forgetting, by choosing not to investigate corruption or other matters, or failing to do so definitively and with enforcement, hello January 6th investigation, we will instead find ourselves forgetting what has happened. By not holding one another accountable, we have found ourselves in a time when accountability doesn't matter and cannot happen. This is how Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert were canceled from their TV shows. They made cracks about someone, which, as comedians, kind of an expected part of their job. But what we're seeing now is that someone in a position of power, like the president, uses or arguably abuses his power by threatening fines or whatever it was he threatened. So the show gets canceled. Except then everyone wants to cancel their streaming and other services, and suddenly the show is back on. But in this situation, no one even tried to hold anyone else accountable until consumers did, just straight up canceling the show. Some of this was about vengeance and some accountability, and some not being able to hold two ideas at the same time. Like, that was in poor taste, and also I generally like the show. I'm not a big Kimmel fan. I didn't follow this super closely. This matters, though, to so many people because, as Gessen writes, we have found relief in sitting down at the end of the day in front of the screen and watching the hosts of major late-night talk shows state the obvious in their opening monologues. They imagined the unimaginable, thought the unthinkable, and spoke the unspeakable. There was nothing funny about it, but the audience laughed with relief. Not being bound by the conventions of respect and restraint, comedians could free us from the magnetic sense that we were crazy. None of this was normal. It wasn't us. And instead of waiting to see if there was any follow-through with fines or licenses or court orders, execs just did what they thought was easiest. out of fear, which is how we lose our freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And we obey in advance, the opposite of Timothy Snyder's maxim. Not to mention that free speech is also being used to eliminate or drown out or destroy other free speech. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press are hallmarks of a functioning, healthy democracy, so important that they are enshrined in the First Amendment. As Ressa writes, democracy is fragile. You have to fight for every bit, every law, every safeguard, every institution, every story. You must know how dangerous it is to suffer even the slightest, tiniest cut. That is why I say to us all, we must hold the line. And later she says, the ability to discern and question, which is crucial to both journalism and democracy, is also determined by education. Journalists and news organizations are a reflection of the people's power to hold its leaders accountable. That means that ultimately the quality of a democracy can also be seen in the quality of its journalists. Going back to the idea of a shared reality, Gessen elaborates that journalism is essential to democracy because it creates a sense of shared reality across the city, a state, a nation. Without this shared reality, a public sphere cannot exist. This is the intersection of everything we've covered so far: othering, identity, truth, meaning, journalism. It all comes down to this. This time we are living in has created, through the erosion and attack on journalism and the freedom of speech, the unchecked rise of social media and surveillance capitalism, which makes us each have our own algorithm constantly catering to our interests to keep us engaged, the coexistence of truth and alternative facts. We each have our own reality. We are, as a society, splintered into increasingly polarized and opposing sides. We cannot stand each other, cannot have conversations, which means, too, that we cannot share dreams or hopes or beliefs in the future. A shared reality can create a shared vision for who we might yet become, rooted in our shared past. A divided reality creates division and violence, an apocalyptic future based on a past that never existed, but for the comfort of some in this moment. Sometimes what it means to win is to not lose ourselves, to hold space for the good. As my colleague, the Reverend Latifah Griffin, was recently quoted as saying in a recent UU World Wayfinder, I think people aren't looking for answers, but they're looking for authentic community, moral grounding, and a vision rooted in hope and action. So I think right now our values compel us, all of us, not just ministers, but lay leaders and congregants alike, to speak uncomfortable truths and to hold space for healing at the same time. And so this is our work, to tell the truth, to support good journalism and keep informed, to tell our stories, to question simplicity, especially when it asks us to turn away from each other, to honor the fullness of our history, telling the stories so often overlooked, to dream about the future and its wild possibility, to organize, collaborate, and build community, to gather together, to care for one another and our neighbors, to remember that we are all more than one thing, to channel our universalism and find ways to love even those we don't want to not lose ourselves, to not be changed by social expectations and peer pressure as things worsen, to know that who we are and who we are not, to prepare for the hardships ahead, prioritizing the most marginalized and oppressed, to nurture our connections and relationships when to do so does not cause harm, to know in our bones that we need each other, to hold the line for our values, to listen with our hearts at least as much as our minds, to reweave our we's to include more tomorrow than we do today, and to never lose hope that another world is coming if we make it. Please rise and lift your voice in song with me for our closing hymn, Gather the Spirit. The words will again be on the screens.